Thank you everyone for coming to the town hall on September 29th. When I became district attorney, or as a candidate, I remember talking often about the fact that we don't have a state of the union or a state of the city or a state of the Commonwealth for DAs. And in certain communities, who your DA is far more important than who the President of the United States is, your governor, your mayor, or your federal or state elected officials. So I promised that if I won, I was going to make sure that we had quarterly town halls where we actually left our building and went out into the community to explain what we were doing for part of the time, and also to hear from the community about the concerns they had, answer their questions. In my first year of office, 2019, we had 4 community town halls. They were geographically based. The first one was in Roxbury at Hibernian Hall. The second one was in Chelsea. The third one was in Winthrop. And the fourth one was in Mattapan. As we all know, COVID-19 hit in 2020, and we are now having topical-based town halls. So what we are going to talk about today is the collateral consequences of COVID-19. You're going to hear from some exceptional people in my office, whether it is Charlene Luma, who is our chief and oversees all of our victim witness advocates. Charlene is a licensed independent clinical social worker. She's going to set the table on how we look at everything in a trauma-informed way. You're going to hear from Luke, who is the head of our Crime Strategies Bureau, which when I became DA, we moved several different units together so that they could constantly be talking, so we could be proactively thinking about crime as opposed to reacting to crime. Luke oversees the juvenile, the narcotics, the youth violence task force, as well as human trafficking units. You're going to hear from Audrey and Susan. Audrey runs our child protection unit. Susan runs our children's advocacy center. You're going to hear from Ian, who does domestic violence and adult sexual assault, Nicole, who works in our juvenile unit, and Dana and Liz, who run our municipal and district court divisions. But what I want to start with is the fact that I'd like people to understand how I look at these issues as the DA, how I sort of place things together, and the way I speak to my staff about these intersectionalities that I see in many of the problems we're facing right now. So this global pandemic has exacerbated the already unprecedented rates of unemployment in certain communities. It's increased the number of people suffering from food and housing insecurity. It has expedited foreclosures and evictions. It has forced parents to be responsible for homeschooling, significantly set back students with IEPs or for whom English is a second language, and thus widening the already enormous gap in education between them and their more wealthy counterparts. This leaves children and youth without the support and engagement often provided by daycare, aftercare, or summer camp. Many of these contacts with children are mandated reporters. So we in Suffolk County are gravely concerned about the safety of these children. Home may not be safe for them. School is where they eat and receive care and love and safety. Each of these situations alone would be accelerants for stress and potentially violence in any community, but specifically in Black and Brown communities. We are also concerned when we talk about children and their lack of access to school being a respite for them. Many victims of domestic violence, irrespective of gender identity, are experiencing that violence now in their home, and work is the place that they get to go to be valued, where they get to go to be free of trauma or violence or any other form, not just physical violence either. When we add to this, and according to every news outlet and publication on the planet, we are currently seeing that this is occurring more in communities of color. These current disparities in health outcomes and access to poorer communities and the disproportionately higher rates of infection and death from COVID-19, we see all this happening in Black and Brown communities. All of these things are stressors and traumas that combined are a recipe for disaster. Notably, many of the communities where violence is erupting within Suffolk County are home to the very people who have been keeping us all fed, clean, and safe throughout the height of this global pandemic, and continue to do so as we still battle against COVID-19. These are supermarket employees, sanitation workers, food service and food processing staff, hospital employees, people who work in transportation, and caregivers, to name a few. They have no choice but to go to work because they don't have the luxury of telecommuting or Zooming into their jobs. Many also don't have paid sick leave or hazard pay. These essential and often invisible workers are barely provided a living wage in some circumstances. These are epic societal failures that make the violence in these communities even more traumatic and devastating. And we need not look any farther than Chelsea for proof of this. Chelsea's part of Suffolk County, 67% Latinx, overwhelming and vibrant immigrant community there. But Chelsea is also holding steady as the #1, often, most impacted city and town in our Commonwealth, with the highest category rate of COVID-19. So are Winthrop and Revere, which are the 3 other of the 4 total parts of Suffolk County: Boston, Chelsea, Winthrop, and Revere. So as I said, I'm deeply troubled by the increase in recent uptick in homicides and non-fatal shootings and stabbings and violence. These murders and acts of violence harm victims and vicariously traumatize their families and loved ones, as well as the entire community where the violence occurred. Witnesses are emotionally harmed, and the families and communities of the person who is alleged to have committed the harm are impacted as well. They may not have engaged in the violence. They did not wish the victim or their family any harm, but they too find themselves in an unwanted, awful situation. I have often said you can love someone and denounce their behavior, and I know firsthand that this is true. In Suffolk County, we are working diligently with our law enforcement partners to respond to and proactively disrupt violence. This has been shown in recent months with our collaboration with federal, state, and local law enforcement partners targeting violent individuals who harm and injure and removing them from our neighborhoods. In addition, this is precisely why we created the Crime Strategies Bureau within our office, which I spoke of earlier, that has narcotics, juvenile, youth violence task force, and human trafficking divisions within the Crime Strategies Bureau, so we can proactively look and disrupt crime and violence before it happens. But I will say that the work continues. One of the things I want to make sure you know we're going to be talking about is the uptick in violence and the uptick in behavior on Mass Ave and Melnia Cass, where 4 separate districts within Boston Police or the state police intersect. We have D4, C6, and B2 of the Boston Police Department, as well as the Mass State Police there. And you will hear me say later that I am a proponent of safe consumption sites, or at least taking nothing off of the table when it comes to our brothers and sisters and loved ones who are in a battle with addiction and substance use disorder, often coupled with mental health issues. We are now seeing all of the negative side effects of a safe consumption site with none of the positive. We have an unsafe consumption site on the corner of Mass Ave and Melnia Cass, where people are actively participating in drug behavior, actively participating in misconduct and violence and harm, using the public streets as toilets. And we do need to talk about things like having public toilets available for individuals so they don't have to suffer such indignities as having to use a toilet on the street because there are no public toilets available for them to use. But we need to start having hard conversations about how we are going to handle this problem with dignity and compassion, because these are people. You're now about to hear from some exceptional people within my office to talk about what they do, and then I'll come back to answer questions. Thank you so much.